There was a console that sat under millions of televisions for the better part of a decade. Black, rectangular, slightly tilted. And the games it ran weren't just good games. They were the games an entire generation grew up with. The ones you remember exactly where you were when you first played them. The ones that still feel like home. This is the PlayStation 2 era and what it actually was. To understand what the PS2 meant, you have to understand what the PS1 built. Sony entered the console market in December 1994 with the original PlayStation, a machine that had originally been designed as a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo, before the partnership collapsed. It launched at $299 and sold over 102 million units across its lifetime, the first console to break 100 million. The PS1 proved three things that shaped everything Sony built afterward. CD-ROM storage enabled longer, more cinematic games. Final Fantasy VII in 1997. 3 discs, 40 hours, full orchestral soundtrack. Demonstrated what the format could hold. Metal Gear Solid in 1998 used the hardware to deliver an experience that felt cinematic in a way nothing had before. Third-party support was the battlefield. By winning Squaresoft, Namco and Konami away from Nintendo, Sony established that the most important games in Japan and the West would release on PlayStation first. The PlayStation brand meant something. By 2000, PlayStation wasn't just a console. It was a cultural identity. A generation of players had grown up with it. The PS1's market position created a specific expectation for what came next. More storage, more visual fidelity, more cinematic ambition. The audience that had grown up with Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid was ready for whatever came next. And Sony had built enough brand loyalty that they would follow it there. The PS1 era created the audience. The PS2's job was to keep them and bring everyone else along. Sony launched the PlayStation 2 in March 4, 2000 in Japan, October 26, 2000 in North America, November 24, 2000 in Europe, and the line of people waiting for it stretched around every block. The PlayStation 2 launched in North America on October 26, 2000. Sony had allocated 500,000 units for the launch. Demand was estimated at over 1 million. Launch price $299, the same price as the original PlayStation 6 years earlier. First week North American sales, approximately 500,000 units. Every available unit sold. Sony scrambled to increase production. The shortage lasted through Christmas 2000, with PS2 units selling on eBay for up to $1,000. By the end of March 2001, Sony had shipped 10 million PS2 units worldwide. The PS2's dominant position wasn't built on games alone, at least not at first. The console launched with a DVD player built in. In 2000, standalone DVD players retailed between $150 and $400. The PS2 at $299 was simultaneously a next-generation games console and one of the most affordable DVD players on the market. For millions of households, the PS2 was the first DVD player they owned. It sat in living rooms, not because of Tekken Tag Tournament or SSX, but because parents wanted to watch The Matrix. That placement mattered enormously. A console in the living room, rather than a teenager's bedroom, reached a different audience. People who had never owned a PlayStation bought the PS2 for its DVD functionality and fun games alongside it. The DVD strategy was accidental genius. Sony hadn't designed the PS2 primarily as a Trojan horse for gaming, but that's what it became for millions of households that would never have bought a dedicated games console. By 2001, the hardware was in enough homes to matter. The games that defined the era were about to arrive. The PS2 library is one of the most discussed in gaming history. Not because every game was great, but because the games that were great were genuinely extraordinary. The numbers define the scale. Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001, 14.5 million copies on PS2. Invented the modern open world template and made the PS2 the only place to play the most culturally significant game of its generation. Grand Theft Auto Vice City in 2002, 17.5 million copies. San Andreas in 2004, 27.5 million copies on PS2 alone. The GTA trilogy made the PS2 the default platform for the biggest franchise of the era. Kingdom Hearts in 2002, a collaboration between Square and Disney that should not have worked, and produced one of the most beloved RPGs of the generation, over 6 million copies. God of War in 2005, a third-person action game that used Greek mythology to push PS2 hardware to its absolute limit, over 4.6 million copies. Its sequel in 2007 came out 2 years after the PS3 launched, and was still considered one of the best games of the year. Shadow of the Colossus in 2005, a game with 16 enemies and almost no other content, that became one of the most critically discussed games ever made. Under 2 million copies at launch, but a permanent fixture in conversation about what games could be. Ico 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, Devil May Cry, Resident Evil 4, Burnout 3, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter. What made the PS2 library extraordinary wasn't just quality, it was diversity. The console hosted genre-defining titles simultaneously across action, RPG, racing, sports, platformer and horror. No single genre dominated. Players with completely different tastes each had a definitive library. And Sony's first-party studios were operating at a level that complemented rather than competed with third-party output. Naughty Dog with Jak and Daxter, Insomniac with Ratchet & Clank, Santa Monica Studio with God of War, Team Ico with Ico and Shadow of the Colossus. The PS2 library felt inexhaustible in a way that's hard to explain to someone who didn't experience it in real time. Every few months something arrived that felt important. Every genre had its landmark title, and the console kept delivering for 8 years. By 2004, the PS2 had established itself as the dominant platform of its generation. It was selling more units per month than its successor would at launch. The PS2 didn't just win its generation, it won it in a way that made the competition almost irrelevant. The PlayStation 2 sold 155 million units across its lifetime, the best-selling home console in history, a record it still holds as of 2026. Its closest competitors, Nintendo GameCube at 21.7 million, Microsoft's Xbox at 24 million. Sony's market share during the PS2 peak years exceeded 70% of the console market, a dominance no single platform has matched before or since in the home console space. Production of the PS2 continued until January 2013, a 12-year commercial lifespan. Sony was still manufacturing new PS2 units 2 years after the PS3 had launched and 1 year after the PS4 had been announced. The dominance created a feedback loop that reinforced itself. More market share meant more developers prioritized PS2 development. More developer support meant a larger library. A larger library justified the purchase for more consumers. More consumers increased market share further. Publishers who had released multiple titles on PS2 and Xbox consistently reported PS2 outselling Xbox versions by 3:1 or 4:1 ratios in most markets. This made PS2 the default platform, the one version that received the most testing, the most marketing support, and frequently the earliest release date. Resident Evil 4 launched on GameCube in January 2005. then came to PS2 in October 2005 with additional content. The PlayStation version sold more copies despite releasing 9 months later. For players during this period, owning a PS2 meant owning the definitive version of almost every game that mattered. That wasn't brand loyalty, it was the rational choice. The PS3 launched November 2006 in North America, $499 for the base model, $599 for the premium, and the PS2 kept selling. The PlayStation 2 era wasn't just a console generation, it was a cultural moment, and the last one of its kind. By 2004, over 70 million PS2s had been sold worldwide. In the United States alone, approximately 1 in 3 households with a games console had a PS2. In Japan, that ratio was even higher. The console crossed demographic lines that no platform before had managed at that scale. The DVD functionality brought it into living rooms rather than bedrooms. The breadth of the software library, from children's titles to mature-rated open-world games, meant it existed across age groups simultaneously. Games like GTA San Andreas sold 27.5 million copies on a platform with 155 million total units. Penetration rates that meant the game existed in approximately 1 in 6 PS2 households. These weren't niche products, they were shared cultural reference points. The PS2 era coincided with a specific moment in gaming's cultural timeline. Online gaming existed but wasn't the default. Most PS2 games were played locally, often with people in the same room. Multiplayer meant someone sitting next to you. The social experience of gaming was physical. Memory cards created a personal relationship with saved data. Your PS2 memory card held your specific progress, your specific characters, your specific story states. Losing a memory card was a genuine loss. The absence of patches and updates meant games shipped complete. What arrived on disk was what the game was. Players who found their way through difficult sections did so without guides in hand, or with physical strategy guides purchased separately. What the PS2 era felt like was a version of gaming that didn't know it was about to change. No online infrastructure, no digital storefronts, no live service models, no patches arriving the day after launch. Just a disc, a console and a television. And games that were built to exist completely within that simplicity. The PS2 was discontinued in January 2013. It had been on the market for 12 years and sold more units than any console before or since. From a $299 launch price and a DVD player nobody expected, to 155 million units and the most diverse game library any single platform has ever produced. The PlayStation 2 era was defined by what it did differently. It was defined by what it did completely. A library that covered every genre. A platform that reached every demographic. A generation of players who grew up inside it. And carry specific memories of specific games that no remake or remaster will ever fully reproduce. The PS2 era was the last time a single console felt like it contained all of gaming. And that's why it still matters. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It genuinely means the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a case.